The scalpel felt like an extension of her hand, a precise, cool instrument of control. In the sterile, bright chaos of the operating room, Dr. Whitney Reed was the calm at the center of the storm. The steady beep of the heart monitor was her metronome. "Suction," she said, her voice calm and authoritative behind her surgical mask. "Clamp." This was her language. This was where things made sense. A problem presented itself, and she fixed it. There were no hidden agendas on the operating table, just anatomy, physics, and skill. The surgery, a complex aortic aneurysm repair, lasted another 2 hours. As she sutured the final layer of tissue, a familiar wave of focused exhaustion washed over her. It was a good tired, a productive tired. She scrubbed out, the scent of antiseptic soap replacing the metallic tang of blood. Her phone, silenced for the duration of the procedure, buzzed insistently from her locker. 11 missed calls, all from her older brother, Mark. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. Mark never called. He texted, usually to ask for money or to complain about their father. Her thumb hovered over his name. Maybe it was Dad. A heart attack? Another fall? She took a deep breath and hit call back. He answered on the first ring. "Finally! Jesus, Whit, where have you been?" "In surgery, Mark. It's what I do for a living. What's wrong? Is it Dad?" "What? No, he's fine." Mark's voice was strained, oddly breathless. It's the company." Whitney leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the locker. "Not Dad. Good." The company, Reed & Son, construction, was her father's life's work. His pride, his obsession. What about it? There was a meeting, this morning, with the lawyers, and the new partners. A deeper chill seeped into her bones. New partners? What are you talking about? Dad would never sell a controlling stake. He didn't sell, Mark said, and the silence that followed was heavier than any words. "Whit? He's retiring, effective immediately. He's handing over the reins." The relief was momentary, instantly replaced by confusion. Handing them to who? You? It was the natural assumption. Mark was the son in Reed & Son, even if he'd spent more time in the company's fleet trucks smoking weed than actually learning the business. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. "Not quite. He named a successor. It's Steve." Whitney's mind went blank. Steve? Who? The only Steve she could think of was Steve from accounting, a man in his late 60s who was 2 years past his own retirement party. "Know it? Steve. Your Steve. Caldwell." The world tilted. The sounds of the hospital hallway, the squeak of shoes, the distant pages faded into a dull roar. Steve Caldwell, her ex-fiancé, the man she'd built a life with for 7 years, the man who'd worked beside her father for the last 5 of those years, learning the business from the ground up, becoming the son her father never had. The man who had shattered her heart into a million pieces when he'd called off their wedding 18 months ago with a vague, cowardly text about needing space and different paths. She hadn't seen or spoken to him since. And now, he was the heir to her family's empire. "That's not possible," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It is. The papers are signed. Dad gave a whole speech about vision and fresh leadership and legacy." Steve sat right there at the head of the table, smiling like he'd won the goddamn lottery. Everyone was there, Whit. The whole gourd, all the senior foremen, me. His voice cracked. "He didn't even mention your name." The sucker punch. It wasn't the company itself. She had her own, demanding, fulfilling career. It was the symbolism, the brutal, unequivocal erasure. Her father had chosen the man who had broken her over her own daughter. "I have to go," she mumbled, ending the call before Mark could reply. She slid down the locker to the floor, the cool tile seeping through her scrubs. She stared at her trembling hands, hands that could suture a ruptured artery, hands that could hold a life in their grasp, and felt utterly powerless. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message, delivered in the cruelest way possible. The context was a lifetime in the making. Mark, the firstborn son, had been groomed for leadership that lacked the discipline or the intellect. Whitney, the daughter, had the drive, the brains, the sheer force of will. But she was a woman in a man's world, both in medicine and in her father's old-school construction business. During summer summers, while Mark partied, she'd been on the sites, learning to read blueprints, manage crews, and estimate costs. She had proposed efficiency upgrades her father had ignored. She had even uncovered a material skimming operation by a site foreman, saving the company thousands. But her path was medicine. She thought her father was proud. He'd bragged about his daughter the surgeon at every company barbecue. Yet when it came to the thing that truly mattered to him, the company, he'd never once looked at her as a potential successor. He'd looked past her to her fiancé, and when that fiancé was no longer in the picture, he handed it to him anyway. She drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of order and calm, felt like a museum of a life that had just been proven false. Photos of her and her father at her medical school graduation. A picture of her, Steve, and her dad on a fishing trip. Steve's arm is slung around her father's shoulders like he was the son.
A corrosive mix of grief and rage began to burn through the shock. She picked up her phone and called her father. It went straight to voicemail. She texted, "Mark told me, we need to talk." No response. The bubbles didn't even appear. An hour later, fueled by a cold, clarifying fury, she did something she'd vowed never to do. She looked at Steve's LinkedIn profile. There it was. His headline, already updated, Chief Executive Officer at Reed & Son Construction. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound in the quiet apartment. Son. The irony was breathtaking. Her phone buzzed. A notification from a local business news site. The headline made her blood run cold. Reed & Son Construction announces leadership transition. Industry visionary Steve Caldwell takes helm as CEO. She clicked on it. There was a photo of her father, looking older and more diminished than she'd ever seen him, shaking Steve's hand. Steve stood tall, confident, a bland, triumphant smile on his face. The article quoted her father extensively. Steve embodies the future of this company. His innovative ideas are exactly what we need to grow. I have every confidence in his leadership. Not a single mention of the Reed family. Not a word about his own children. It was as if they had never existed. The article also mentioned a major new project. The one Whitney knew her father had been pinning his retirement hopes on. The Apex, a multi-use high-rise in the city's booming downtown. It was the biggest project in the company's history. The permits, the financing, the initial groundwork, all of it had been secured under her father's leadership. Steve was just walking into the finished cockpit and claiming he'd built the plane. Something in the financials mentioned in the article snagged her attention. The funding structure for the Apex was complex, a web of private equity and bank loans. One of the primary investors was a firm called Vesper Capital. She'd never heard her father mention them. The terms, as briefly outlined, seemed unusually aggressive for a company that had always prided itself on conservative, debt-averse growth. A thought, dark and unwelcome, crept into her mind. Steve's departure from their relationship had been swift, brutal, and financially tidy. He'd moved out of their shared apartment and into a luxury high-rise within a week. At the time, she'd been too heartbroken to question it. Now she wondered. Had there been whispers back then about him and a woman from the finance world, a woman with connections? She fell into a fitful sleep, her mind churning with fragments of conversations, financial terms, and Steve's placating smile. The next day at the hospital, she was a ghost. She performed her duties with robotic precision, but her mind was elsewhere. During a lull, she closed her office door and called an old friend from business school, Chloe, who was now a financial analyst. "Chloe, I need a favor from you. I need you to look into something for me. Discreetly." "Whit, you okay? You sound terrible." "I've had better weeks. It's about my father's company and a firm called Vesper Capital." She heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard. Vesper. Yeah, I know the name. Niche player, aggressive. They specialize in leveraged buyouts and distressed assets. Why? The term distressed assets landed like a blow. Reed & Son wasn't distressed. It was profitable, stable. Or so she thought. "They're a major investor in my dad's new flagship project. It doesn't feel right." Chloe was silent for a moment. "Okay, sending you a secure link. Upload any documents you can find. News articles, press releases, whatever. I'll see what I can dig up on the deal structure. But Whit, if this is what I think it is, you need to be careful." The suspense was a physical weight on her chest. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime. She avoided her family, ignoring calls from Mark and her silent father. She was operating in a vacuum, waiting for Chloe's intelligence. 2 days later, the email arrived. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a link to an encrypted file server. Whitney's hands were cold as she downloaded the report. Chloe's analysis was meticulous and devastating. Vesper Capital hadn't just invested in the Apex. They'd essentially engineered it. The terms of the loan were predatory, with balloon payments and covenants so tight they were almost impossible to meet. Furthermore, Chloe had found a pattern of shell companies and holding entities that traced back to Steve Caldwell. He hadn't just been given the company. He'd orchestrated a silent coup, using Vesper's money to pressure her aging father into a corner, forcing him to cede control. The report concluded with a chilling footnote. Whit, this looks less like a succession plan and more like a staged takeover. The financials are designed for failure. If Reed & Son misses even one milestone on the Apex, which, given the aggressive timeline, is highly likely, Vesper seizes control of the entire company assets, the name, everything. Your father wouldn't just be retired, he'd be wiped out. Steve and Vesper walk away with everything. He wasn't just the CEO. He was a Trojan horse. The rage that filled her was unlike anything she'd ever felt. It was clean, sharp, and purposeful. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family rejection anymore. This was about theft. This was about destroying her father's life's work out of sheer greed. Steve hadn't just broken her heart, he was trying to break her family. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't go to her father. He was too proud, too manipulated, too committed to his chosen narrative. Mark was useless. The board had already sanctioned this. She was alone. But she was a surgeon and she had just diagnosed a cancer. Now she had to operate. Her first move was to request an emergency leave of absence from the hospital, citing a family medical crisis. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her second move was to go to the source. Using a private number, she called the main line of Reed & Son and asked for Mr. Caldwell's office. His new assistant, a woman with a syrupy voice, put her through. Steve Caldwell. His voice. It sent a jolt through her system, a toxic mix of old affection and new, pure hatred. "Hello, Steve." She kept her voice flat, professional. A long pause. "Whitney." He sounded shocked, then wary. I heard about your leave. Is everything okay?" "Let's not pretend you care about my well-being, Steve. I know about Vesper. I know about the loan covenants. I know this whole thing is a house of cards designed to collapse." The silence on the other end was absolute. She could almost hear him calculating. The friendly veneer vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge she'd only glimpsed once before, the day he'd ended things over text. "I don't know what you think you know, Whitney, but you're out of your depth. This is a complex business deal, far beyond the scope of a doctor. I understand asset stripping just fine, Steve. I also understand betrayal. Meet with me." He laughed, a short, derisive sound. "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I will go to the press with everything I have. The Wall Street Journal would love a story about a corporate takeover built on a broken engagement. It's too juicy. The bad press alone will spook your investors and violate your communication covenant with Vesper. The House of Cards falls a little sooner than you'd planned." Another silence, thicker this time. He'd blindsided her. He thought she was just the heartbroken ex, not the threat. "Fine," he bit out. "My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. And Whitney, come alone." The headquarters of Reed & Son felt like enemy territory. The receptionist, a new hire who didn't recognize her, gave her a visitor's badge. The walls were already changing. Old photos of job sites were being replaced by slick, generic modern art. Steve's touch. His corner office was her father's. The massive oak desk was the same, but everything else was different. Cold, minimalist, expensive. Steve stood by the window, looking out over the city he was trying to carve up. He turned as she entered. He was dressed in a custom suit, every inch the powerful CEO. But she saw the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Whitney," He didn't offer a hand, didn't offer a seat. Whitney, you've redecorated. I guess erasing history comes easily to you. What do you want? He asked, cutting to the chase. I want you to walk away, resign, void the deal with Vesper, leave my family's company alone.
He smiled, a thin, condescending stretch of his lips. That's not going to happen. The deal is done. Your father signed the papers. The board approved it. This is legal, binding, and frankly, none of your business. Making it my business is what I do with things that are sick and need to be cut out, she replied, her voice steady. I have a full financial analysis. I know you're leveraged to the hilt. I know you can't possibly meet the timeline on the apex. The project is a time bomb, and you're the one who set the fuse. His composure cracked. You have no proof of anything. I have the truth, and I'm not the heartbroken little girl you left behind, Steve. I'm a problem you didn't account for, and I'm not going away. Their stare-down was broken by his phone buzzing. He glanced at it, and a flicker of panic crossed his face. It was Vesper. He rejected the call. Whitney pounced on the weakness. Trouble in paradise? Are they getting nervous? Have the delays on the foundation work already started? He took a step toward her, his voice low and venomous. Listen to me. You need to back off. This is bigger than you, bigger than your family's sentimental little business. There are powerful people involved. You start making noise, and you won't just ruin me. You'll ruin your father. He signed personal guarantees. When this goes south, he loses everything. His company, his house, his savings, everything. Is that what you want? It was the final brutal twist of the knife. He'd not only taken the company, he'd set her father up to take the fall. She left his office, her heart hammering against her ribs. He thought his threat would paralyze her, but it had the opposite effect. It had given her a new target. Saving the company was one thing. Saving her father from his own naivety and pride was another. The next week was a covert operation. Whitney used every ounce of her intelligence, her discipline, and her rage. She couldn't go through official channels, so she went under them. She met with the old site foreman she'd trusted years ago, who gave her access to the real-time project logs for the Apex. The delays were worse than she'd thought. She met with the company's long-time, now sidelined CFO at a diner far from the office. The old man was nervous, ashamed, but confirmed her worst fears. Her father had been manipulated during a period of poor health, convinced that Steve and Vesper were the only salvation. She was building her case, but she was running out of time. The first major milestone payment to Vesper was due in 3 weeks. The company wouldn't make it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mark. He showed up at her apartment, unannounced, looking more sober and serious than she'd seen him in years. I've been doing some digging too, he said, handing her a USB drive. I'm an idiot, but I'm not blind. Steve's been funneling money, small amounts, through change orders on old projects. I think he's building a safety net for when this all explodes. Whitney plugged in the drive. It was a mess of spreadsheets and scanned invoices, but the pattern was there. Embezzlement. It was the final piece. Steve wasn't just an ambitious thief. He was a desperate one, covering his own tracks. She had him. The annual Reed & Son shareholder meeting was in 2 days. Steve would be there, confident, laying out his glorious vision for the Apex. Her father would be in the front row, a sad, proud puppet. She knew what she had to do. The day of the meeting, Whitney dressed not in her surgeon scrubs, but in a sharp, black tailored suit. Armor. She arrived at the hotel ballroom early and took a seat in the very back, behind a pillar, unseen. The room filled with employees, minor shareholders, and family friends. She saw her father, pale and thin, being helped to a seat by Mark. Her heart ached for him. Then Steve took the stage, oozing confidence. He clicked through a glossy PowerPoint presentation full of renderings of the Apex and graphs showing projected growth. He spoke about innovation, the future, and the bold partnership with Vesper Capital. It was a masterpiece of lies. During the Q&A session, after a few softballs from planted attendees, Whitney stood up. Mr. Caldwell, a question about the Vesper Capital loan covenants, specifically Clause 7B regarding milestone delays. The blood drained from Steve's face. He squinted into the lights, trying to see who had spoken. Her father turned around, his eyes widening in shock and confusion. I'm not sure who, Steve began, trying to regain control. I'm Dr. Whitney Reed,
And I have a follow-up. Can you explain the discrepancies in the change order invoices for the Harborview project? The ones that funneled nearly $200,000 into a shell corporation registered in your name. The room went dead silent. Steve was frozen, microphone in hand, his mouth slightly agape. This is a highly inappropriate forum, he stammered. I have the documents right here, she continued, holding up a thick folder. For the board, for the shareholders. I have the full financial analysis showing how this company is being deliberately driven into the ground for a hostile takeover. And I have proof of embezzlement by the CEO you all just applauded. Chaos erupted. Shouts, questions. Her father stood up, his hand over his heart, looking from her to Steve and back, the horrible truth dawning in his eyes. Steve pointed a shaking finger at her. She's lying. She's a scorned woman trying to get revenge because I ended our relationship. Whitney didn't flinch. She looked directly at her father. I loved him, Dad. And he used that to get to you. To get to this. She gestured at the stage, at the company banner behind Steve. He's going to let you take the fall when it all collapses next month. It wasn't a trial. It was an execution. The evidence was too damning, her delivery too precise. The board members, pale and stunned, hurriedly called for a recess. Security, looking confused, approached Steve, not her. In the end, it was swift. Steve was escorted from the building, his reign as CEO lasting less than a month. Vesper Capital, exposed and facing a potential scandal, quietly withdrew from the deal to avoid further scrutiny. The company was saved, but it was wounded. Her father was broken, humiliated, and remorseful. He tried to apologize, his words tumbling out in a grief-stricken jumble, but Whitney held up a hand. I didn't do it for an apology, Dad. I did it because it was the right thing to do. She didn't take over the company. She helped install the old CFO as interim CEO and helped restructure the Vesper debt into something manageable. She gave her father back his legacy, but she couldn't give him back the illusion of the perfect son he'd thought he had. A week later, a plain envelope was delivered to her apartment. Inside was a single key and a note from her father. The cabin. It's always been yours. I just forgot to tell you. It was the place she'd loved most as a child. Her true inheritance. She stood on her balcony, looking out at the city. The Apex site, now dormant, was a silent monument to greed and betrayal. But it was also a monument to her victory. Not a victory of revenge, but of truth. She had stepped into the operating theater of her family's dysfunction, diagnosed the cancer, and cut it out. The patient would survive. Her phone buzzed. It was the hospital asking when she planned to return. She smiled for the first time in weeks. I'll be there tomorrow, she said. I'll be there tomorrow. She was Dr. Whitney Reed, and she was finally, completely, free. The silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was full of the peace that comes when you stop fighting for a place at a table that was never set for you. Instead, build your own.